When I overheard my husband Blake whispering about divorce plans during my 40th birthday celebration, I never expected the inheritance documents that arrived the next morning would reveal his decade-long scheme to claim my family's fortune. The Toy, same man who had vowed to love me through everything, was plotting to leave with half my birthright the moment it became accessible. What he didn't anticipate was that my grandmother's trust fund came with stipulations that would turn his carefully orchestrated plan inside out, and that I had already set my own countermoves in motion. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The crystal champagne flutes clinked melodically against each other. As 30 of our closest friends raised a toast in the private room of Bellamy's, the upscale bistro in the heart of Boston's Beacon Hill, my husband Blake stood beside me, his arm wrapped possessively around my waist as he addressed our gathered guests. "To my beautiful wife, Olivia, on her 40th birthday," he announced, his voice carrying that distinctive confidence that had first attracted me to him 12 years ago at a charity gala. "You've given me the most incredible decade of partnership, and I can't wait to see what the next chapter brings." I smiled up at him, taking in his perfectly tailored navy suit, the distinguished salt and pepper at his temples, and those hazel eyes that still made my heart skip after all these years. To everyone watching, we were the perfect power couple. He, the brilliant investment banker, me, the art curator with family connections to some of New England's oldest money. What they couldn't see was the slight tension in his smile, the way his fingers tapped nervously against the stem of his glass, or how his eyes kept darting to his watch every few minutes. "And to think," he continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially as our guests leaned in, "tomorrow is the big day we've been waiting for. A toast to new beginnings." Our friends cheered, assuming he meant some romantic surprise he'd planned for after my birthday. Only I knew he was referring to the activation of my grandmother's trust fund, a substantial inheritance that would finally become accessible on my 40th birthday, after being held in a carefully structured trust for 20 years following her passing. As the evening progressed, I circulated among our guests, accepting birthday wishes and engaging in the light social banter expected of someone in my position. The Bradbury Gallery, where I served as head curator, had recently secured an exclusive exhibition of emerging Asian artists, and several board members present were eager to discuss the anticipated opening. "Olivia, darling, this exhibition could put us on the international map," Margaret Winthrop, our board president, gushed after her third glass of champagne. "Your connections in the art world are simply invaluable." I nodded politely, though my attention had drifted across the room. Blake had disappeared from the main celebration. Excusing myself from Margaret, I moved toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, my burgundy evening dress whispering against the polished hardwood floors. That's when I heard his voice, low, urgent, coming from a secluded alcove near the restaurant's wine cellar entrance. "Everything's in place, Daniel. The papers will be ready tomorrow afternoon," Blake was saying, his back to me as he spoke into his phone. "Once the trust fund activates in the morning, we'll have a narrow window before she realizes what's happening." I froze, my hand gripping the edge of the wall as I listened. "Trust me," he continued with a short laugh. "After 12 years of playing, the devoted husband, I've earned every penny of this payoff. Do you know how hard it's been, listening to her drone on about 19th century impressionists and pretending to care? But her grandmother's fortune makes it all worthwhile." My stomach clenched, a cold wave of realization washing over me. The trust fund, my 40th birthday. The timing wasn't coincidental. The prenup becomes contestable once the trust activates. That's what Lawrence confirmed. Massachusetts law gives me grounds for the duration of our marriage. We file immediately, claim emotional abandonment, and I walk away with half. Almost 40 million. Not bad for a decade of playing house. The champagne turned sour in my stomach. I must have made some small sound because Blake suddenly stiffened, turning toward the hallway. I slipped into the ladies' room before he could spot me, locking myself in a stall as my mind raced and my hands trembled. Was this really happening? Had my entire marriage been a calculated investment on his part? I thought of the times he'd seemed so genuinely supportive of my career, so interested in my family history, so insistent on waiting to have children until the time was right. The time was right. The phrase echoed in my head with new meaning. He'd been waiting for my 40th birthday all along, for the trust fund to mature. I splashed cold water on my face, careful not to smudge my makeup, and returned to the party, with a plastered smile that felt like it might crack my face. Blake was back at the center of the celebration, charming as ever, raising another toast to my incredible wife and her remarkable family legacy. The words that had once sounded loving now rang hollow with their double meaning. As I watched him work the room, I saw for the first time how calculated each interaction was. The way he would casually mention financial ventures to my wealthier friends, how he'd position himself next to influential connections, always the supportive spouse while quietly building his own network. When did I become so blind? Or had I simply seen what I wanted to see? The remainder of the evening passed in a surreal blur. I performed the role expected of me: gracious birthday girl, loving wife, successful professional, while inwardly my mind cataloged every suspicious moment from our marriage that I'd previously dismissed. The frequent golf outings with his attorney, Daniel. His sudden interest in my family's financial history. The subtle questions about my grandmother's estate. The way he'd discouraged me from having children, which would have complicated the inheritance. By the time we arrived home to our Louisburg square townhouse, purchased primarily with my family money, I had moved beyond shock into a cold, calculating clarity. Blake popped another bottle of champagne in our kitchen, the marble countertops reflecting the warm lighting from the designer, fixtures he'd insisted on during our recent renovation. To us, he said, handing me a glass. And to tomorrow. I took the glass, studying his face. Was there a hint of smugness there? A trace of anticipation in those eyes I'd once found so sincere? "You've been quiet since we left the restaurant," he remarked, loosening his tie. "Feeling the weight of 40? "Actually, I've been thinking about my grandmother," I replied carefully, watching his reaction. "About her legacy." Interest flickered immediately in his expression. Eleanor was an extraordinary woman. Her financial acumen was decades ahead of her time. Not her art collection, which I'd written my thesis on. Not her philanthropic work, which had inspired my own career path. Not her personal warmth, which I'd shared stories about throughout our marriage. No, her financial acumen was what he admired. She was always very careful about protecting what mattered, I said, sipping my champagne while maintaining eye contact. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. Something like uncertainty flashed across his face before he masked it with a smile. "A family trait, it seems. You Prestons don't leave much to chance." "No," I agreed, setting down my glass. "We don't. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel." Now, back to where we left off. Later, as Blake slept soundly beside me, how could he sleep so peacefully after plotting to dismantle my life? I slipped out of bed and padded silently to my home office. The antique roll-top desk had belonged to my grandmother, its hidden compartments a source of childhood fascination. Now I pressed the secret panel beneath the right drawer, revealing a small space containing a single business card. Morgan Sullivan, attorney at law, with a private cell number handwritten on the back. 6 months earlier, I'd consulted Morgan when some inconsistencies in Blake's financial statements had raised red flags. She had advised caution and discretion, while we gathered more information. "Men like your husband," she'd said. "They don't make careless mistakes. If you're seeing discrepancies, it's because he wanted you to see them, or because there's something much bigger he's hiding." I'd dismissed her concerns then, unwilling to believe Blake could be deliberately deceiving me. Now I took a photo of the business card with my phone and carefully returned it to its hiding place. Morning arrived with painful brightness, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our bedroom. Blake had already risen, and I could hear him moving about downstairs, the occasional ping of his phone suggesting he was deeply engaged in messaging someone. I checked my own phone to find several birthday texts from friends, but more importantly, an expected email from Preston Family Holdings, the entity that managed my grandmother's estate. "Dear Olivia," it began formally, "per the stipulations of Eleanor Victoria Preston's final testament and trust agreement, we hereby confirm the activation of trust fund designation PRE 40 Olivia, effective 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time today. As per your prior instructions, all relevant documentation has been delivered via secure courier to your designated location. Congratulations on this milestone, and please contact us with any questions regarding the administration of these assets." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. From my position at the top of the stairs, I watched as Blake practically sprinted to answer, it straightening his casual sweater as he moved. His eagerness was palpable and sickening. A courier stood on our doorstep, holding a large sealed envelope. "Delivery for Olivia Preston Hayes," he announced formally. "I'm her husband, I can sign," Blake said, reaching for the package. "I'm sorry, sir. I need Ms. Preston Hayes personally. Strict delivery instructions." I descended the stairs slowly, tying my silk robe more securely around my waist. "I'm Olivia Preston Hayes," I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions beneath the surface. The courier checked my ID carefully, before handing over the package and having me sign his electronic pad. "Have a nice day, ma'am," he said before turning away. Blake hovered nearby, trying to appear casually interested rather than ravenously curious. "Birthday documents from the family?" he asked lightly. "Yes," I replied, equally casual. "Grandmother's trust fund activation. Nothing unexpected." His eyes tracked the package in my hands like a predator following prey. "Want me to look it over?" "With you?" Financial documents can be confusing. The condescension might have gone unnoticed before, but now it grated like sandpaper. I had a master's degree in arts administration with a focus on nonprofit finance. I wasn't financially naive. I'd just trusted the wrong person. "I think I'll review it privately first," I said. Family tradition. Grandmother was big on personal financial responsibility. Disappointment flickered across his face before he covered it with an understanding nod. "Of course. I'll make some breakfast while you do that. Celebratory birthday waffles?" "Perfect," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. In my office door locked, I carefully opened the package. Inside were multiple documents in separate folders, each labeled with precise legal terminology. The first contained the formal trust activation papers, essentially confirming that approximately $80 million in assets were now under my control, with various stipulations about management and distribution. The second folder, however, was what I was most interested in. Labeled Contingency Provisions, it contained documentation that my grandmother and I had secretly arranged during the final months of her life when she was battling cancer. Eleanor Preston had been married 3 times, and while her third husband had been the love of her life, her second had been a costly mistake, a fortune hunter who had nearly decimated her inheritance before she extricated herself from the marriage. "Never let a man know exactly what you're worth, Olivia," she had told me during one of our final conversations, "and always have an escape route they don't know about." At the time, I was newly engaged to Blake, deliriously in love, and couldn't imagine needing such cynical precautions. But to humor my grandmother, I had agreed to her conditions, including the special provisions that would activate if certain conditions were met. The third folder made my breath catch. Labeled simply Hayes Investigation, it contained detailed financial records, surveillance reports, and transcripts of conversations that painted a damning picture of my husband's true intentions. My grandmother, it seemed, had never fully trusted Blake and had arranged a private investigation of him that continued even after her death, managed by the trustees. Page after page revealed a calculated deception spanning our entire relationship. Blake Hayes had researched wealthy single women, specifically targeting those with inheritance prospects. He had been methodically siphoning smaller amounts from our joint accounts for years, building a separate financial safety net. He had a long-standing arrangement with his attorney Daniel to orchestrate high-net-worth divorces for a percentage of the settlements. And most painfully, there were photographs of Blake with other women in various cities, always during his essential business trips that he couldn't reschedule. The final document in the package was a handwritten letter from my grandmother, preserved in a protective sleeve. My dearest Olivia, if you are reading this letter, then my suspicions about the man you married have proven correct, and the trustees have determined that the contingency provisions should be activated. I take no pleasure in being right about such matters. In fact, I have prayed daily that I was wrong about Blake Hayes. What you do with this information is entirely your choice. You may confront him, divorce him, or forgive him, though I sincerely hope you will not choose the latter. What matters is that you are now forewarned and forearmed. Remember that you are a Preston before you were ever a Hayes. Our family has weathered wars, depressions, and personal betrayals for generations. This is simply another storm to endure, with the dignity and strategic thinking that is your birthright. The trust has been structured to protect you from precisely this situation. Mr. Hayes will find that his plans have significant legal obstacles he did not anticipate. All my love, Grandmother Eleanor. I traced my fingers over her elegant handwriting, feeling her strength reach across time to steady me in this moment of crisis. My eyes burned with tears, not for the imminent collapse of my marriage, but for the grandmother who had seen the truth I had been too in love to recognize. A knock on my office door jolted me back to the present. Olivia? Waffles are getting cold, Blake called, the handle turning fruitlessly against the locked door. Is everything okay with the trust documents? I quickly returned the papers to their folders, securing them in the hidden compartment of my grandmother's desk. Then I checked my appearance in the small mirror on the wall, wiped away any trace of tears, and straightened my shoulders. Everything is perfect, I called back, unlocking the door to face my husband. The trust activated exactly as expected. Blake's smile was brilliant, his eyes alight with what I now recognized as thinly disguised avarice. That's wonderful news, he exclaimed, pulling me into an embrace. We should celebrate properly tonight. I've already made reservations at Maison Laurent, my favorite restaurant, an extravagant gesture to maintain the charade for one more day. I wondered how he would have played it if I hadn't overheard his phone conversation. Would he have maintained the facade through dinner, then surprised me with divorce papers over dessert? Or perhaps waited until the following morning, after one last night of pretending to love me? Actually, I said, extricating myself from his embrace, I've made plans for today. The trust activation comes with some meetings at Preston Holdings. Family protocol. His smile faltered slightly. You didn't mention any meetings. Didn't I? I kept my tone light. It must have slipped my mind with all the birthday excitement. They shouldn't take long. Just some signatures and formal acknowledgments. Legal formalities. You know how these old family trusts are. I could come with you, he offered quickly. For support. That's sweet, I said, patting his cheek in a gesture that felt incredibly patronizing, exactly as intended. But it's a Preston family matter. Very traditional about these things. I'm sure you understand. As I headed upstairs to shower and dress, I could feel his eyes following me. Calculations and recalibrations almost visibly running behind his perfect features. His plan had hit its first unexpected obstacle. He hadn't anticipated being excluded from the trust activation meetings, likely because I had just invented them. In reality, my grandmother's trustees had given me one crucial advantage: 24 hours notice before Blake or anyone else would be able to access information about the trust's activation. 24 hours to prepare my counterattack against the man who had spent 12 years positioning himself to steal half my inheritance. And thanks to my birthday revelation, I intended to use every minute of that time. I moved through our townhouse with deliberate calm, selecting my outfit with strategic precision. A charcoal Chanel suit that conveyed authority and old money without ostentation. As I fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings, I caught Blake watching me from the doorway of our bedroom. "You look like you're heading into battle, not a family meeting," he observed, his tone light, but his eyes calculating. I met his gaze in the mirror. The Prestons take financial matters very seriously. Grandmother always said to dress for the legacy you're inheriting, not just the money. His reflection smiled, that practiced, perfect smile that had once made my heart flutter. Now I could see the artifice behind it, the careful calibration of charm designed to disarm and manipulate. "Will you be home for dinner?" he asked. "If the meetings run late, I can move our reservation." "Don't worry about the reservation," I replied, applying a final touch of lipstick. "I'll text you when I know more about my schedule." I gathered my leather portfolio, another gift from my grandmother, and headed downstairs. Blake followed, hovering as I collected my keys and phone. "Is that all you're taking?" he asked, eyeing my empty hands. "Don't you need the trust documents for your meetings?" A test. He wanted to know where I'd put the papers, whether I was taking them with me or leaving them vulnerable at home where he might accidentally discover their contents. "The trustees have their own copies," I answered smoothly. "Everything's digitized now anyway. Welcome to the 21st century." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Still, it is important to keep the originals safe." "Don't worry," I assured him with a cryptic smile. "They're exactly where they need to be." As I slipped behind the wheel of my Audi, I watched Blake in the rearview mirror. He remained on the doorstep until I turned the corner, then immediately pulled out his phone, thumb flying across the screen, reporting this unexpected development to Daniel, no doubt. Instead of driving to the Preston Holdings offices downtown, I headed in the opposite direction, toward the affluent suburb of Wellesley. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the circular driveway of a stately colonial home set back from the road behind mature oak trees. Morgan Sullivan was waiting for me on the porch of her home office, a separate wing of the house where she conducted her most sensitive legal consultations. At 58, she projected the kind of understated authority that came from decades of handling the affairs of Boston's elite families. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, her expression warm but analytical as she greeted me. "Olivia," she said, embracing me briefly. "Happy birthday, though I suspect it's been anything but." "You could say that," I replied, following her into the wood-paneled study that smelled of leather-bound books and subtle sandalwood. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I've been half expecting your call for months," she admitted, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the comfortable leather chairs arranged around a low table. "Your grandmother was very specific about the timing," I raised an eyebrow. "You knew about the trust's contingency provisions?" "I helped Eleanor draft them," Morgan confirmed, pouring 2 cups of tea from a service already prepared. "She was my client for 30 years. When she became concerned about your husband's intentions, she consulted me immediately." A wave of emotion swept through me. Gratitude for my grandmother's foresight mingled with fresh grief at having her suspicions confirmed. "I should have listened to her concerns about Blake more carefully," I said quietly. Morgan handed me a cup of tea. "Eleanor understood the heart's ability to override the head better than most. That's precisely why she put these protections in place." She settled into the chair opposite mine. "Now, tell me exactly what happened." I recounted the birthday party, revelation, Blake's phone conversation, and this morning's document delivery. Morgan listened attentively, occasionally making notes in an elegant leather-bound portfolio. "And you're certain he's planning to file divorce papers today?" she asked, when I finished. "Based on what I overheard, yes. He believes the trust activation creates a window of opportunity to contest a prenuptial agreement." Morgan's lips curved in a small, satisfied smile. "And that, Olivia, is where his research failed him. May I see the contingency documents?" I removed the folders from my portfolio and handed them to her. While she reviewed them, I sipped my tea and tried to quiet the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm my carefully maintained composure. "Your grandmother," Morgan said finally, looking up from the papers, "was one of the shrewdest women I've ever known. These provisions are exactly as we planned, and precisely what we need. Can you explain what they mean?" I reviewed them quickly, but some of the legal terminology— Morgan set the folders on the table between us. "In simple terms, your grandmother created a double-blind trust structure. The public-facing trust, the one that Blake believes activated today, is essentially a shell. It contains approximately $5 million, which is certainly substantial, but nowhere near the full Preston fortune." My confusion must have shown on my face because Morgan continued, "The activation notice you received, the courier delivery, those were deliberately designed to be visible to your husband. A performance, if you will." "A performance?" I echoed. "The real Preston Trust activated on your 39th birthday, quietly and without fanfare. It's been fully under your control for an entire year, managed through a separate entity that doesn't bear the Preston name." She tapped the folders. "These documents merely formalize your access to the secondary trust, which Blake's research would have identified as the main inheritance." Understanding dawned slowly. "So when Blake files for divorce, he'll be claiming half of $5 million, not half of $80 million. Morgan's smile widened slightly. "And even that claim will fail, because the secondary trust includes specific marital separation provisions that supersede Massachusetts marital property laws." The brilliant simplicity of my grandmother's strategy left me momentarily speechless. She had anticipated this betrayal years in advance and had constructed an elaborate legal fortress to protect me, all without my knowledge. "There's more," Morgan continued, turning to the investigative reports. "These documents provide grounds for criminal charges against your husband. Wire fraud, financial manipulation, conspiracy to commit fraud." The investigators documented multiple instances where Blake misrepresented himself to financial institutions using your family credentials. "Criminal charges," I repeated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I never imagined it would come to that." Morgan's expression softened. "Olivia, this is entirely your decision. We can proceed with a quiet divorce and financial settlement. That gives Blake nothing but his own premarital assets, or we can pursue more aggressive options, including criminal complaints." "What would you advise?" I asked, suddenly feeling the weight of these decisions. "Professionally, document everything, protect your assets, and extricate yourself from this marriage as cleanly as possible." She paused. "Personally, I'd make damn sure he never does this to another woman." Her candor startled a laugh from me, the first genuine one since I'd overheard Blake's conversation yesterday. "What's our immediate next step?" I asked, my resolve strengthening. "First, we need to secure your personal assets and documents," Morgan replied, shifting into tactical mode. "Does Blake have access to your personal accounts? Safety deposit? Boxes? Family heirlooms?" I considered it carefully. "We have joint checking and investment accounts, but I've maintained separate personal accounts as well. The most valuable family pieces, jewelry, art, are either in museum collections or secured in the Preston Vault at Commonwealth Trust." "Good. What about digital assets? Emails, cloud storage, personal devices?" My stomach tightened. "We share some passwords for household accounts, and he set up my laptop's backup system." Morgan nodded grimly. Then we assume he has access to everything. We'll need to change all passwords immediately and sweep your devices for spyware. She made a note in her portfolio. Now, timing is crucial. Based on what you overheard, Blake plans to file divorce papers today. We need to preempt him. How? The courts won't be open until Monday. Morgan checked her watch. It's just past 10. Judge Caroline Winters owes me a favor, and she's authorized to process emergency filings from home. She reached for her phone. With your permission, I'd like to file for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences. We'll follow with an amended complaint next week that includes the evidence of fraud. My heart pounded against my ribs. This was really happening. The dissolution of 12 years of marriage in the span of a morning. Yet beneath the natural grief was something stronger. Determination. Do it, I said firmly. While Morgan made calls from her office, I stepped onto the back porch, needing a moment alone. The October air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves, and the gardens behind Morgan's home were ablaze with autumn colors. I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls and 5 text messages from Blake, increasing in urgency. 10:15 a.m. How are the meetings going? 10:37 a.m. Just checking in. Let me know when you'll be home. 11:02 a.m. Called Preston Holdings. They said you don't have any meetings scheduled today. Where are you? 11:15 a.m. Olivia, answer your phone. I'm concerned. 11:23 a.m. This is ridiculous. I'm your husband. Call me immediately. So he'd called my bluff about the meetings. I should have expected that. His escalating tone revealed his growing panic. The carefully constructed plan was unraveling, and he couldn't locate his target. As I debated how to respond, another text arrived. 30 m. Something's come up at work. Emergency client situation. I've had to go to the office. We'll talk tonight. A lie. Blake's emergency client situation was undoubtedly a meeting with Daniel to salvage their scheme. I typed a deliberately vague response, taking some time to process everything. Don't wait until tonight. Within seconds, he replied. What do you mean, process everything? What's going on? I silenced my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Let him wonder. Let him worry. The tables had turned, and now Blake was the one operating with incomplete information. Morgan rejoined me, her expression satisfied. Judge, Winters has agreed to process our filing today. Her clerk is expecting my courier within the hour. By close of business, you'll officially be the plaintiff in divorce proceedings against Blake Hayes. Relief washed through me. Thank you, Morgan. Don't thank me yet. We're just getting started. She handed me a business card. This is Jacob Mercer, a digital security specialist who works exclusively with high-net-worth clients in sensitive situations. He's expecting you at noon. For what exactly? To secure your digital life. New phone, new laptop, new email addresses, all with military-grade encryption. Blake and his attorney won't be able to access any of your communications going forward. The thoroughness of Morgan's response suggested she had handled similar situations before. You seem very prepared for this, I observed. Unfortunately, what's happening to you isn't as uncommon as you might think, she replied. Wealthy women are targeted with disturbing frequency. After 4 decades of practice, I've developed certain protocols. We spent the next hour outlining a comprehensive strategy. I would stay at Morgan's guest house for the weekend while Jacob secured my digital presence. On Monday, we would access the Real Preston Trust to transfer funds for immediate living expenses. By Tuesday, I would have a completely separate infrastructure, financial, digital, and physical, from the life I had shared with Blake. What will he do when he's served with divorce papers? I asked as we wrapped up our planning session. Based on the profile in these investigative reports, he'll cycle through several predictable responses, Morgan said. First, confusion and denial. Then anger and accusations, likely claiming you've been manipulated by family or friends against him. Next, he'll attempt reconciliation, possibly with grand gestures and emotional appeals. When those fail, he'll switch to threats, legal, financial, or personal. And finally, when he realizes he's lost control of the narrative and the outcome, he'll try to negotiate the best possible exit for himself. Morgan closed her portfolio with finality. Our job is to ensure that exit includes full accountability for his actions. As I prepared to leave for my appointment with Jacob, Morgan placed a gentle hand on my arm. Olivia, there's one more thing your grandmother wanted you to have today. She moved to her desk and unlocked a drawer, removing a small box wrapped in silver paper. She asked me to give you this on your 40th birthday, but only if the contingency provisions were activated. I accepted the package with trembling hands, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a vintage silver locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of my grandmother as a young woman, her expression confident and slightly mischievous. On the opposite side was an inscription in minute engraving, "Survival first, justice second, thrive always." It was her personal motto, Morgan explained. After her second divorce, I closed the locket and slipped the chain around my neck, feeling its comforting weight against my skin. She really did think of everything, didn't she? Eleanor Preston left nothing to chance, especially when it came to protecting the people she loved. Armed with my grandmother's talisman and her wisdom, I headed to my meeting with Jacob, each step taking me further from the life I had shared with Blake and closer to the future I would build on my own terms. The offices of Mercer Digital Security occupied the top floor of a discreet building in Cambridge, its entrance unmarked except for a small plaque bearing the company's logo, a simple shield design. I was escorted immediately to a conference room where Jacob Mercer waited, surrounded by an array of technology. At 35, Mercer had the intense focus of someone who spent most of his time solving complex problems in digital space. He greeted me with a firm handshake and no wasted words. "Mrs. Preston Hayes, Morgan briefed me on your situation. We have a lot to accomplish today. Please, call me Olivia." He nodded once, then gestured to the equipment laid out on the table. First step is to establish a secure communication infrastructure. New phone, new laptop, new email domains, all routed through encrypted channels that can't be traced back to your existing accounts. For the next 3 hours, we created my new digital identity. Jacob methodically transferred essential data from my existing accounts while installing sophisticated security protocols on my new devices. He explained each step with technical precision, ensuring I understood not just what we were doing, but why. "Your husband works in finance, correct?" he asked as he configured my new laptop. "Investment banking? Yes. Then we have to assume he has access to high-level financial investigative tools. Ordinary privacy measures won't be sufficient." His fingers flew across the keyboard. "We're implementing protocols typically reserved for witnesses in federal protection programs." The gravity of that statement wasn't lost on me. "Is that really necessary?" Jacob paused, meeting my eyes directly. "Mrs. Olivia, in my experience, when someone has spent years planning to appropriate tens of millions of dollars, they rarely accept defeat gracefully. The greater the potential prize, the more extreme the reaction when it's denied." He resumed typing. "Better to overprotect than underestimate." By late afternoon, I had a completely new digital identity, untraceable to my existing accounts. My new phone contained none of my previous contacts except those Jacob had vetted and transferred. My new laptop connected to secure servers that would mask my location and activities. "One final step," Jacob said, producing what looked like an ordinary thumb drive. "This contains a complete backup of everything we've configured today, plus a program that will allow you to check for surveillance software on any device or in any location. Use it regularly." I accepted the drive, suddenly overwhelmed by how dramatically my life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I had awakened beside my husband of 12 years, blissfully unaware of his true nature. Now I was essentially going into hiding, armed with encryption software and counter-surveillance tools. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching slightly, "for treating this with the seriousness it deserves." Jacob's expression softened momentarily. "This is what I do, Olivia. And unfortunately, you're not my first client in this situation." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, you're handling this with remarkable composure. Most people in your circumstances are too overwhelmed to absorb half of what I've shown you today." His observation gave me pause. Perhaps I should have been more emotional, more distraught over the collapse of my marriage. Yet instead of grief, what I primarily felt was a cold, clarifying anger. And beneath that, a steely determination to reclaim control of my life. "My grandmother used to say that panic is a luxury for those without responsibilities," I told him. "The Preston family has endured for over 200 years because we face crises head-on." Jacob nodded approvingly. "That's a philosophy more people should adopt." He handed me a business card with only a number. No name, no company. "Call this line directly if you have any security concerns moving forward. It's monitored 24/7. As I gathered my new devices, my secure phone buzzed with a message from Morgan. "Divorce. Filing complete. Blake Hayes will be served within the hour. Return to my home immediately. Do not go to your residence under any circumstances." The countdown has begun. By now, Blake would have realized his carefully constructed plan was unraveling. Soon he would discover that I had not only escaped his trap, but had sprung one of my own. I texted a brief acknowledgement to Morgan and headed for my car, the weight of the silver locket against my skin a constant reminder of the woman whose foresight had armed me for this battle, a battle I now intended to win decisively. The autumn twilight was deepening as I drove back to Morgan's Wellesley estate, fallen leaves swirling in my wake. My new secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Morgan herself. "Olivia, where are you right now?" Her voice carried an urgency that immediately put me on alert. "About 10 minutes from your place. Why?" "Blake showed up at my office downtown 20 minutes ago, demanding to know if I've seen you. My assistant denied any knowledge, but he wasn't convinced." She paused. He seemed extremely agitated. When security asked him to leave, he made a scene. A chill ran through me. How would he know to look for me at your office? That's what concerns me. My connection to your grandmother wasn't public knowledge. Either he's been investigating your family's legal relationships, or he's had you under surveillance. The possibility that Blake might have been monitoring my movements made my skin crawl. I thought of all the private conversations I'd had in our home, the personal emails I'd sent from my computer. Should I still come to your house? Yes, but take precautions. Drive past the entrance, continue 2 miles, then double back on. Orchard Lane. There's a service entrance to the property. My security team will meet you there. The cloak and dagger nature of these instructions would have seemed absurdly melodramatic 24 hours ago. Now, after what Jacob had said about people's reactions when millions were at stake, it felt entirely justified. Understood. I'll be there soon. I followed Morgan's directions precisely, constantly checking my rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. The paranoia felt foreign to me. I was an art curator, not a character in a thriller. Yet the professional responses from both Morgan and Jacob suggested this level of caution was warranted. As promised, 2 men in discreet security uniforms met me at the service entrance, quickly escorting me to the guest house behind Morgan's main residence. The stone cottage, nestled amid mature maple trees, offered both privacy and protection. "We've done a full security sweep," one of the men informed me as he handed over a set of keys. "The premises are clear, and we've activated the perimeter monitoring system. If anyone approaches within 30 feet of the cottage, silent alarms will notify our team immediately." I thanked him, momentarily overwhelmed by the surreal turn my life had taken. Less than 2 days ago, my biggest concern had been whether The lighting design for our upcoming exhibition properly showcased the subtle brushwork of our featured artists. Inside the guest house, I found Morgan waiting in the small sitting room, a fire crackling in the stone hearth. Despite the warmth, her expression was grave. "Blake has been served with the divorce papers," she announced without preamble. Based on the report from our process server, he didn't take it well. I sank into an armchair, suddenly exhausted. "Tell me." He was at his attorney's office, Daniel Hargrove's firm in the financial district. Apparently, they were in the process of preparing their own filing when our papers arrived. A hint of satisfaction crossed Morgan's face. According to the server, Blake became physically agitated, shouting that there must be some mistake, that you couldn't possibly know what you were doing. The image of Blake losing his carefully maintained composure was both satisfying and unsettling. In 12 years, I had rarely seen him truly angry. He preferred cold calculation to hot emotion. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait for their official response, which I expect will come Monday morning." Morgan settled into the chair opposite mine. "In the meantime, we need to discuss your immediate security and your long-term strategy." A series of texts suddenly buzzed through on my new phone, messages forwarded from my old number via the security protocol Jacob had established. "Davin 17 p.m. Olivia, this is insane. Call me immediately. 18 p.m. Whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop. You're making a terrible mistake." 23 p.m. I just got served with divorce papers? This is some kind of sick joke. 25 p.m. I'm coming home. We need to talk face to face. This misunderstanding has gone far enough. 40 p.m. Where are you? I'm at the buy house and you're not here. Your car is gone. Where are you? The escalating panic in Blake's messages should have given me satisfaction. Instead, they triggered a wave of nausea. This man, this stranger, had shared my bed, my home, my life for 12 years, all while calculating the optimal moment to betray me. "He's trying to locate me," I said, showing Morgan the messages. She nodded grimly. Classic control response. When the target escapes the predator's reach, the first priority is to re-establish contact and regain control. She studied the messages. Notice the progression. First, dismissal of your actions as insane. Then commands disguised as concern. Then direct demands for your location. Should I respond at all? Not yet. Let him experience the uncertainty he was planning to inflict on you. She checked her watch. I expect his next move will be to contact your friends and family, posing as the concerned husband. Who would he call first? I considered it. My cousin Rebecca, probably. We're close, and he's always been careful to maintain good relationships. With my family, call her immediately. Warn her that Blake may reach out, and give her only the information you want him to have. I dialed Rebecca's number on my secure line. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm. "Olivia, I was just about to call you. Happy birthday again." "Thanks, Becca, but listen, this is important. Has Blake contacted you today?" A pause. "No. Should he have? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. Blake and I are separating. I've filed for divorce. If he calls you, please don't tell him where I am or how to reach me. It's complicated, and I'll explain everything soon. But right now, I need your help with this. "Oh my God, Liv." Rebecca's shock was audible. "What happened? Are you safe?" "I'm safe. Yes. The full story is too much for the phone. But the short version is that I discovered Blake married me for my money, and he was planning to file for divorce immediately after my trust fund activated, which would have been today." "That absolute bastard," Rebecca breathed, her initial shock transforming instantly to protective fury. "Where are you staying? Do you need anything?" "I'm somewhere secure. The less you know right now, the better, both for my safety and so I can honestly say you don't know my whereabouts if he asks." "Understood. But Liv, the family should know. Aunt Patricia, at least. She's the matriarch since grandmother Eleanor passed. I'll call her next, I promised. Just remember, no information to Blake, no matter how distraught he might seem. After similar calls to my Aunt Patricia and my closest friend Samantha from the gallery, I felt a measure of protection forming around me. A network of women who understood implicitly the potential danger of my situation, even without knowing all the details. Morgan had been making calls of her own, and now she rejoined me with a folder of documents. The security team will remain in place overnight. Tomorrow morning, we have an appointment with Judge Winters at her home to discuss an emergency protective order. A protective order? I echoed, surprised. Blake hasn't threatened me physically. Financial abuse is still abuse, Olivia, and men who lose control of financial schemes often escalate to other forms of intimidation. Morgan's expression was deadly serious. The investigative reports in your grandmother's files detail Blake's pattern of escalating control behaviors throughout your marriage. Subtle isolation from friends who weren't suitable, gradual assumption of decision-making power, micromanagement of your schedule and activities. I wanted to protest that she was exaggerating, but the evidence was there in my own memories. The friends Blake had subtly criticized until I stopped seeing them. The career opportunities he had advised against because they didn't align with our long-term goals. The increasing instances where he had spoken for me at social functions. I didn't see it, I said quietly. Any of it. Most people don't, Morgan replied, her tone gentler. These patterns develop gradually, like water slowly eroding stone. By the time the damage is visible, it's already run deep. My secure phone buzzed with another forwarded message from Blake. 15 p.m. Olivia, I'm worried about you. This sudden behavior is concerning. Are you with someone who's influencing you? Please come home so we can sort this out like adults. The transparent manipulation in his words, the implication that I wasn't capable of independent thought, that someone must be influencing me, was so obvious now that I wondered how I had missed similar tactics throughout our marriage. He's shifting strategies, Morgan observed, reading the message over my shoulder. Moving from anger to concern, suggesting you're not acting rationally. Next will likely be appeals to your history together, followed by specific promises of change. As if on cue, another message arrived. 18 p.m. Thinking about the night we met at the MFA gala. You were so passionate about that Sargent exhibition, and I knew immediately you were special. 12 years of building a life together deserves more than this. Whatever concerns you have, I promise we can address them together. The reference to our first meeting, at a Museum of Fine Arts fundraiser where I had indeed been enthusiastically discussing John Singer Sargent's watercolors, was calculated to evoke nostalgia and emotional connection. What struck me now was how perfectly Blake had positioned himself that night, expressing just enough knowledge of art to engage me while focusing the conversation on my interests. The perfect hunter. Identifying his prey, don't respond, Morgan advised, seeing me stare at the message. Each response gives him information and a sense of control. Right now, your silence is your power. We spent the next hour reviewing the legal strategy for Monday's court appearance. The Preston Trust's protective provisions would be formally activated, securing the bulk of my inheritance from any claims. Blake's access to our joint accounts would be frozen, preventing him from emptying them in retaliation. The evidence of his premeditated scheme would be submitted to support expedited divorce proceedings. What about the Bradbury Gallery? I asked, suddenly, thinking of my professional responsibilities. I'm supposed to be finalizing the exhibition plans next week. We'll need to contact them on Monday, but I suggest taking a brief leave of absence, Morgan replied. Between the divorce, proceedings, and securing your financial assets, you'll need to focus on these matters fully for at least a few weeks. The thought of stepping away from the gallery, my professional passion, was painful, but I recognized the necessity. This was no ordinary divorce. It was financial warfare with potentially criminal dimensions. At 9 o'clock, as Morgan was preparing to return to her main house, my secure phone rang with a call from my cousin Rebecca. "Liv, I didn't want to text this," she began without preamble. "Blake just showed up at my apartment looking like hell. He's demanding to know where. You are, saying he's worried sick and that you're having some kind of breakdown." My heart pounded. "What did you tell him?" "Exactly what you said. That I have no idea where you are and that he should respect your privacy. He didn't believe me. He's convinced I'm hiding you or that I know who is." Her voice lowered. "Liv, he was scary. Not violent, but intense. Desperate. When I refused to help him, he said something about how she has no idea what she's risking and that millions are at stake." A chill ran through me. "You're sure that's what he said? Millions are at stake?" Word for word. "Then he said something about how people you trust are using you to get to your inheritance." She paused. "Olivia, is that what this is really about? Your grandmother's money?" "It's exactly what it's about, but not in the way Blake is suggesting," I confirmed. "Are you okay? Did he leave when you asked?" "Eventually. I threatened to call the police if he didn't." Rebecca's voice hardened. "I've known Blake for 12 years, and I've never seen him like this. Whatever's happening, be careful, Liv." After the call ended, I relayed the conversation to Morgan, who immediately contacted her security team to heighten their vigilance. "Blake's behavior is escalating faster than I anticipated," she said, frowning. "His direct approach to your cousin suggests he's growing desperate. That makes him more unpredictable. And potentially more dangerous," I added, thinking of the unfamiliar intensity Rebecca had described. "Precisely. I'm staying in the main house tonight rather than returning home. We'll accelerate our plans and meet Judge Winters first thing in the morning." After Morgan left, I wandered through the guest cottage, too restless to sleep despite my exhaustion. The space was beautifully appointed with antique furniture and original artwork, yet it felt impersonal. A way station, rather, than a home. I thought of my townhouse, filled with objects I had carefully collected over years: the Moroccan rugs from our honeymoon, the Japanese prints I had purchased at auction, the first edition books that lined my study shelves, all the physical manifestations of a life I had believed was built on love and partnership, now revealed as an elaborate illusion. My new phone buzzed one final time that evening. 10:47 p.m. "Olivia, this is your last chance. Come home now and we can still fix this. You have no idea what you're doing or who you're dealing with. Tomorrow will be too late." The naked threat in Blake's words confirmed what Morgan and Jacob had been telling me. This was never just about divorce. The man I had married was prepared to go to extreme lengths to secure my inheritance, and now that his plan was derailed, those same extremes might be directed at preventing me from protecting myself. I forwarded the message to Morgan with a brief note. "Evidence for the protective order?" Her response came immediately. "Absolutely. Each message strengthens our case. Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow we take this to the next level." Sleep proved elusive, however. I lay awake in the unfamiliar bedroom, my grandmother's locket clutched in my palm, mentally cataloging the decade of my life spent with a man who had seen me not as a partner, but as a long-term investment. The subtle warning signs I had dismissed, the inconsistencies I had rationalized, the gradual isolation from certain friends and family members, all part of a calculated strategy to position himself for the ultimate payday. Around 2 a.m., unable to quiet my racing thoughts, I moved to the cottage's small study and opened my new laptop. With the security protocols Jacob had installed, I could safely access information without leaving digital footprints for Blake to follow. I began researching similar cases: wealthy spouses targeted for their inheritances, long-term marriage, frauds, investment bankers involved in financial impropriety. What I found was disturbing. a pattern of sophisticated predators who specialized in identifying and exploiting wealthy individuals, particularly women with substantial family assets. The tactics described matched Blake's with eerie precision. The careful research of targets, the cultivated persona tailored to appeal to the victim's specific interests, the gradual assumption of control over finances and social connections. 1. Article, written by a forensic accountant who specializes in high-net-worth divorce cases, caught my attention particularly. It described what the author called inheritance hunters, individuals who specifically targeted heirs to family fortunes, especially those with delayed trust activations. These predators play the long game, the article explained. They may invest years cultivating the relationship and establishing themselves as the devoted spouse, particularly if a significant trust has a future activation date. The payoff, potentially tens of millions, justifies the extended deception from their perspective. The article could have been describing Blake's playbook exactly, right down to the timing of divorce proceedings to coincide with trust activation dates. I forwarded the link to Morgan with a brief note. This is exactly what happened to me. As dawn broke over the Wellesley estate, I finally dozed off in the study's armchair, laptop still open beside me, my grandmother's locket warm in my hand, a talisman connecting me to the woman whose foresight had protected me from a betrayal. She had somehow anticipated years before it occurred. When Morgan arrived at 7 a.m. to prepare for our meeting with Judge Winters, she found me already awake, dressed in a simple gray suit, hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, ready for battle. "You look like Eleanor," she said with approval. She always dressed for war when facing a crucial negotiation. I touched the silver locket at my throat. I've been thinking about what she would do in this situation. She'd do exactly what you're doing. Protect herself, secure her assets, and ensure the perpetrator faces consequences. Morgan handed me a freshly brewed cup of coffee. "Judge Winters can see us at 8. Based on the messages Blake sent last night and his confrontation with your cousin, I believe we have strong grounds for an emergency protective order." I took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth and caffeine bolster my resolve. "And then what?" "Then we move to phase 2, securing your financial position completely and gathering evidence for potential criminal charges." Morgan's expression was steely. Blake Hayes thought he could execute a perfect predatory scheme against a Preston woman. By the time we're finished, he'll wish he'd never heard your family name. As we departed for Judge Winters' home, I felt a curious sense of calm. Descent. The initial shock and betrayal had crystallized into something harder and more focused, a determination not just to protect myself, but to ensure Blake faced full accountability for his actions. My grandmother's words from the locket inscription echoed in my mind: survival first, justice second, thrive always. I had secured my survival. Now it was time for justice. Judge Caroline Winters lived in a stately Victorian on the outskirts of Newton, its wraparound porch and traditional architecture, belying the thoroughly modern legal mind that resided within. At precisely 8 o'clock, Morgan and I were escorted into the judge's home office by her judicial assistant. At 62, Judge Winters carried herself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that altered lives. Her silver hair was cut in a practical bob, and her piercing blue eyes assessed me carefully as we were introduced. "Mrs. Preston Hayes," she greeted me, gesturing for us to sit in the leather chairs arranged before her substantial oak desk. "Morgan has briefed me on the broad strokes of your situation. Quite extraordinary circumstances. Thank you for seeing us on a weekend, Your Honor," I replied, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their slight tremor. "I've known Morgan Sullivan for 30 years, the judge said, settling behind her desk. "She doesn't request emergency meetings without genuine cause." She turned to a folder already open before her. "I've reviewed the initial divorce filing and the supporting documentation. Now I need to understand why you believe an emergency protective order is warranted." Morgan presented the evidence methodically. Blake's increasingly threatening text messages, his confrontation with my cousin Rebecca, the investigator's reports detailing his long-term deceptive behavior, and the timing of his planned divorce filing to coincide with my trust activation. Most significantly, Your Honor, Morgan concluded, we have evidence that Mr. Hayes has been planning this financial extraction for years, including documented conversations with his attorney about circumventing the prenuptial agreement once the trust activated. The sudden disruption of his scheme has resulted in erratic, potentially dangerous behavior. Judge Winters turned her attention to me. Mrs. Preston Hayes, have you ever felt physically threatened by your husband during your marriage? I considered carefully. Not physically, no. Blake has always been very controlled. But in the past 24 hours, since his plan unraveled, people who know him well have described his behavior as unrecognizable. My cousin used the word scary to describe his demeanor when he confronted her last night. The judge nodded thoughtfully. And you believe he married you specifically to access your inheritance? The evidence suggests he researched wealthy families with significant trust assets before we met, I replied, the words still painful to say aloud. His correspondence with his attorney, which was documented in the investigative reports explicitly, discusses targeting my grandmother's estate once it became accessible. Judge Winters reviewed several pages of documentation, her expression growing increasingly grave. Finally, she looked up, her decision evident in her eyes before she spoke. Based on the evidence presented, I am issuing a temporary emergency protective order prohibiting Blake Hayes from contacting you directly, approaching your person, or entering any property owned by you or the Preston Family Trust. This order will remain in effect for 14 days, during which time we will schedule a formal hearing to determine if a permanent order is warranted. Relief washed through me. The protective order wouldn't stop Blake if he was truly determined, but it created legal consequences for any attempt to approach or intimidate me. Additionally, the judge continued, I am freezing all joint financial accounts pending the initial divorce hearing. Neither party may withdraw or transfer funds without court approval. Given the evidence of potential financial impropriety, I'm also authorizing expedited discovery of Mr. Hayes's financial activities over the past 5 years. This last provision was particularly important. Expedited discovery would force Blake to reveal all financial accounts, transactions, and communications related to his divorce planning, potentially exposing not just his scheme against me, but any other financial irregularities he might have engaged in. Thank you, Your Honor, Morgan said, accepting the signed orders the judge's assistant handed her. We appreciate the court's understanding of the urgency in this matter. As we prepared to leave, Judge Winters addressed me directly. Mrs. Preston Hayes, one piece of advice from someone who has seen countless divorce cases involving significant assets. This process will likely get uglier before it's resolved. Mr. Hayes has spent years orchestrating this scheme. He won't abandon it easily. I nodded, appreciating her candor. I understand. Good, she replied with a slight smile. Because based on what I've seen in these documents, you're dealing with a particularly calculating individual. The disruption of his plan will likely trigger increasingly desperate tactics. Her words echoed in my mind as we drove back to Morgan's estate. Blake had spent 12 years cultivating his position, carefully laying groundwork for what he believed would be a $40 million payday. The sudden collapse of that plan and the realization that his target had not only escaped but turned the tables on him would not be accepted quietly. What happens now? I asked Morgan as we turned onto the tree-lined drive leading to her. Property. Now we prepare for his countermove, she replied, her eyes scanning the security perimeter out of habit. Based on similar cases, he'll likely take one of 3 approaches. Legal aggression through his attorney, attempting to portray you as mentally unstable or manipulated, or offering a settlement proposal that appears reasonable but contains hidden traps. Which is most likely? Given Blake's financial background and his relationship with Daniel Hargrove, I expect a combination of approaches. Aggressive legal posturing publicly while privately floating settlement offers designed to seem reasonable compared to the public demands. When we reached the guest house, Morgan's security chief met us with an update. Blake had made 3 attempts to call my old phone number since dawn, each time leaving increasingly agitated voicemails. He had also been observed driving past Morgan's downtown office twice in the early morning hours. "He's searching for you," Morgan noted, "but so far he hasn't connected you to this property." "What about the Bradbury Gallery?" I asked suddenly. "I should be there tomorrow for the exhibition planning meeting. He knows my schedule." Morgan considered this. "Missing the meeting might raise questions, but attending creates vulnerability. Do you trust your colleagues at the gallery?" I thought about the close-knit curatorial team I'd worked with for years. "Implicitly, especially Diana Chen, my assistant curator. She's been with me since I joined Bradbury." "Then call her. Explain that you're dealing with a personal situation and need her to cover the meeting. The less detail, the better, but ensure she understands that under no circumstances should she reveal your whereabouts to Blake if he appears." I made the call immediately, relieved when Diana answered despite it being Sunday. "Diana, I need your help with something sensitive," I began, then briefly outlined that Blake and I were separating under difficult circumstances and that I needed to miss tomorrow's exhibition planning meeting. "Whatever you need, Olivia," she responded without hesitation. "I can handle the meeting. The installation plans are already finalized anyway." She paused. "Is there anything else I should know? You sound stressed." I weighed how much to share. Diana was not just a colleague, but a friend, someone who had observed my marriage to Blake through professional dinners and gallery events. "Blake isn't who I thought he was," I said finally. "The separation isn't amicable and he may come looking for me at the gallery. If he does, please don't share any information about me. Not my schedule, my contacts, nothing." Diana's voice sharpened with concern. "Are you safe? Do you need somewhere to stay?" "I'm safe," I assured her. "I have legal representation and security, but I appreciate your concern." After ending the call, I checked my secure email to find a message from Jacob Mercer, the digital security specialist. "Olivia, routine monitoring has detected multiple attempts to access your previous email accounts and financial information through password reset requests. Additionally, location tracking has been activated on your old devices. Recommend maintaining complete digital separation and following previously established security protocols. Your former residence shows signs of digital scanning activity, likely checking for active devices or connections. If you left any technology in the house, assume it has been compromised. We'll continue monitoring and reporting any escalation." JMI forwarded the message to Morgan, who was consulting with her security team in the main house. Her response was, "Immediate. This confirms our suspicions about his technical capabilities. Good thing we took comprehensive precautions yesterday. Consider what else might remain at the townhouse that could be sensitive or that you might need. We'll need to retrieve essential items soon." The thought of the townhouse, my home for the past decade, now being essentially off-limits, created a strange hollowness in my chest. I had left so much behind: clothes, jewelry, personal mementos, my art books, family photographs. The physical artifacts of my life were now potentially being searched and scanned by a man determined to find leverage against me. Mid-morning, I received the first official communication from Blake's attorney. The email arrived on my secure account. The fact that they had already identified this new address was concerning in itself. Preston Hayes, V's Hayes. Docket, MAFC 102377 EMS. Sullivan, this firm represents Blake Hayes in the above-referenced matter. We are in receipt of your client's petition for divorce and the accompanying temporary restraining order, both of which were improperly obtained through ex parte communication with the court. Mr. Hayes categorically denies all allegations contained in these filings and is deeply concerned about Mrs. Hayes's current mental state and the undue influence being exerted upon her by parties who may have financial motivations to disrupt the Hayes marriage. We demand immediate disclosure of Mrs. Hayes's whereabouts to verify her well-being and ensure she is not being coerced. Further, we require immediate access to all trust documentation referenced in your filing to verify their authenticity. Be advised that we are preparing emergency counter motions to vacate the temporary restraining order and freeze all trust assets, pending full psychological evaluation of Mrs. Hayes and complete disclosure of all parties who have communicated with her in the past 72 hours. Mr. Hayes remains committed to his marriage and is willing to participate in couples counseling to address any concerns Mrs. Hayes may have. However, he will not stand idle while third parties manipulate his wife and interfere with their marriage for financial gain. Please respond by 5:00 p.m. today with Mrs. Hayes's location and availability for a direct meeting with Mr. Hayes to discuss resolution of this unfortunate misunderstanding. Daniel Hargrove, Esker. Hargrove, Winters, and Bennett Morgan read the email twice, a grim smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Exactly as expected. Blake's playing the concerned husband worried about his wife's mental stability and external manipulation. It's a textbook. He's claiming I'm mentally unstable? I felt a flare of indignation. It's a standard tactic in high-asset divorce when one party has been caught in wrongdoing, Morgan explained. Discredit the accuser rather than address the accusations. Notice how the letter doesn't actually deny the financial scheme. It simply calls it allegations and then pivots to questioning your mental state and the demand to know my whereabouts. Control tactic. Nothing more. He has no legal right to your location, especially with a protective order in place. She was already typing a response. I'll handle this. Hargrove's bluster might intimidate some, but he knows he's on shaky ground legally. While Morgan crafted her reply, I stepped outside onto the cottage's small porch, needing fresh air and a moment alone. The estate's gardens were beautiful even in autumn, with late-blooming perennials adding splashes of color among the falling leaves. My secure phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert from the Boston Business Journal. Breaking Hayes Capital. Advisors founder Blake Hayes faces divorce filing and potential financial scrutiny. My stomach dropped. The story was already public. I opened the article to find a relatively straightforward account of our divorce filing, noting Blake's position as founder of a boutique investment firm catering to high-net-worth clients and my role as head curator at the Bradbury Gallery. The article mentioned unspecified allegations of financial impropriety referenced in court filings, but provided no details. The final paragraph, however, made my blood run cold. Sources close to Hayes suggest the divorce filing came as a complete surprise and may be the result of external influence on Mrs. Preston Hayes, who recently gained access to a substantial family trust. Hayes Capital Advisors has declined official comment, but internal communications to clients obtained by the Boston Business Journal assert that the firm's operations remain unaffected by the founder's personal matters. Blake was already implementing his strategy, portraying himself as the surprised victim while hinting that I was being manipulated because of my newly accessible wealth. More disturbing was the mention of internal communications to clients, suggesting he was actively working to control the narrative within his professional circle. I forwarded the article to Morgan, who joined me on the porch moments later. I've already seen it, she said grimly. Blake is moving faster than anticipated to shape public perception. We need to counter this immediately. How? I don't want to engage in a public battle. Not public, but targeted, Morgan clarified. We need to reach out to key figures in your professional and social circles with a carefully crafted message before Blake's version takes hold. The curator board at the Bradbury, the Preston Family Foundation directors, key donors to your arts initiatives, anyone whose opinion matters in your world. She was right, of course. Perception management was crucial, especially in Boston's tightly interconnected social and philanthropic communities. Blake was attempting to position himself as the wronged party, using his considerable charm and business connections to create sympathy for his side of the story. What should I tell them? I asked. The truth, but strategically presented. We emphasize the evidence of long-term financial deception, the timing of his planned divorce filing to coincide with your trust activation, and the protective measures being taken based on professional legal advice. We don't need to detail the full scheme, just enough to counteract his narrative. We spent the next hour drafting careful messages to key individuals, each personalized but containing the essential facts needed to inoculate them against Blake's manipulations. I started with my Aunt Patricia, the current matriarch of the Preston family, providing her with enough information to brief other family members appropriately. By early afternoon, our counter-narrative was disseminating through my most trusted connections, creating a firewall against Blake's attempts to portray me as unstable or manipulated. Morgan's response to Daniel Hargrove was similarly strategic, professional but unyielding. Mr. Hargrove, your email has been received and its baseless allegations noted. My client categorically rejects the characterization of her mental state and the suggestion of external manipulation. The evidence presented to the court, which led to the properly issued temporary restraining order, speaks for itself. Mrs. Preston Hayes is under no obligation to disclose her whereabouts to Mr. Hayes, particularly given his documented threats and concerning behavior since being served with divorce papers. The suggestion that she might be coerced is especially ironic given the extensive evidence of Mr. Hayes's long-term financial deception and calculated plan to divorce her immediately, following her trust activation, evidence that includes communications directly involving your firm. Regarding your request for trust documentation, all relevant financial information will be provided through proper discovery channels as required by Massachusetts family court procedures. Any attempt to freeze trust assets will be vigorously opposed and will likely trigger additional scrutiny of Mr. Hayes's financial activities over the past decade. Mrs. Preston Hayes is represented by counsel and protected by court order. Any attempt by Mr. Hayes to contact her directly will be considered a violation of that order and will be addressed accordingly. All communication must be directed through this office. Your client would be well advised to focus on preparing his financial disclosures for the expedited discovery process rather than pursuing baseless claims about Mrs. Preston Hayes's mental state or whereabouts. Morgan Sullivan escorted the afternoon brought a flurry of responses to our outreach efforts. Most expressed shock and support, though a few, primarily Blake's business associates and their spouses, responded with polite but non-committal acknowledgments that suggested they were reserving judgment or had already been influenced by Blake's version of events. Most significantly, Diana from the gallery called with troubling news. Blake showed up at the Bradbury about an hour ago, she reported, her voice tight with tension. He was asking everyone if they knew where you were staying or if you'd mentioned any problems in your marriage recently. When I told him I couldn't help, he suggested that you'd been acting erratically and that your family was concerned about your state of mind. What did you say? I asked, alarmed at how aggressively Blake was pursuing his narrative. I told him that in the 5 years I've worked with you, you've been nothing but rational, professional, and level-headed. Diana's voice hardened. Then, I told him that the gallery was private property, and that if he didn't leave immediately, I would call security. He tried to charm his way around it, but I stood firm. Pride and gratitude for Diana's loyalty warmed me. Thank you. I'm sorry you were put in that position. Don't be. I've always thought there was something off about him. Too perfect, you know? Like he was playing a role. She paused. Olivia, whatever's happening, I'm on your side. The whole curatorial team is. Just tell us what you need. Her support meant more than she could know. The professional reputation I'd built over years of dedicated work at the Bradbury was one of my most valuable assets, one that Blake was clearly attempting to undermine. Having my team stand with me created a crucial bulwark against his efforts. By late afternoon, Morgan had scheduled a formal divorce hearing for the following Thursday, remarkably quick by normal standards, but expedited due to the financial manipulation evidence and Judge Winter's intervention. The hearing would address interim financial arrangements, formalize the protective order, and establish discovery parameters for the full divorce proceeding. 4 days, I said, staring at the calendar notification on my phone. It feels both too soon and not soon enough. Blake will use those 4 days to gather ammunition and shore up his position, Morgan warned. We need to prepare for increasingly desperate tactics as Thursday approaches. As if summoned by her words, my secure phone buzzed with a notification. From Jacob Mercer. Alert. Multiple new attempts to access financial accounts associated with Preston Family Trusts. Sophisticated techniques being employed. All security measures are holding, but attempts are growing more aggressive. Recommend informing all financial institutions to enhance monitoring. Morgan immediately began contacting the financial institutions associated with the Preston Trusts, while I sat at the cottage's small writing desk, trying to process the reality that my husband of 12 years was actively attempting to hack my family's financial accounts. The man I had built a life with, shared holidays and travel and countless intimate moments with, was now employing cyber intrusion techniques to access money that had never been his. The cognitive dissonance was almost physically painful. As evening approached, casting long shadows across the guest cottage's floor, I found myself wondering where Blake was at that moment. In our townhouse, searching for clues to my whereabouts? At his office, plotting strategy with Daniel? Or perhaps at our club, cultivating sympathy among our social circle with a carefully crafted tale of his unstable wife's sudden, inexplicable behavior. Whatever his location, I knew one thing with certainty. Blake Hayes was not a man who accepted defeat. The coming days would test my resolve in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I touched my grandmother's locket, drawing strength from her foresight and protection. The battle lines were drawn. The initial exchanges had occurred. Now the true test would come, and I was determined to face it with the same strength and dignity that had defined Preston women for generations. Thursday morning arrived with a crystalline autumn clarity, the kind of perfect New England day that normally would have filled me with appreciation for the season. Instead, as I dressed for court in a conservative navy suit that Morgan had advised would convey both authority and restraint, my thoughts were consumed with preparation for what would likely be the most consequential public confrontation of my life. The past 4 days had been a whirlwind of legal strategy sessions, evidence preparation, and increasingly aggressive countermoves from Blake. His campaign to portray me as mentally unstable had escalated from whispered insinuations to a formal motion filed with the court requesting a psychological evaluation, claiming that my sudden, irrational behavior suggested potential manipulation or diminished capacity. Morgan had demolished this transparent tactic with a devastating response that included statements from my doctor confirming my excellent mental health, affidavits from professional colleagues attesting to my continued competence and judgment, and most damning of all, evidence that Blake had researched proving diminished capacity and challenging mental competence on his laptop just hours after being served with divorce papers. He's getting sloppy, Morgan had observed when Jacob Mercer's team discovered these searches. Desperation erodes precision. Blake's financial attacks had proven more concerning. Despite the court order freezing our joint accounts, he had attempted to access several investment portfolios connected to the Preston Family Trusts. When those efforts failed, he had begun contacting business associates of my late grandfather, suggesting that I was being unduly influenced by radical attorneys who were hostile to the financial industry and might pursue regulatory complaints against firms that had long-standing relationships with the Preston family. This last move had been particularly calculated, a veiled threat to financial institutions that had managed Preston assets for generations, suggesting that continuing to work with me might expose them to unwanted scrutiny. Classic intimidation tactic, Morgan had explained. He's trying to isolate you financially by making institutions nervous about maintaining relationships with the Preston trusts under your control. Fortunately, most of these institutions had decades-long connections to my family and were not easily manipulated by a relative newcomer like Blake. Still, his willingness to potentially damage my family's financial relationships revealed the depth of his desperation and his vindictiveness. The most personal blow had come yesterday, when Diana forwarded me an email Blake had sent to the Bradbury Gallery's board of directors. In it, he expressed deep concern about my ability to continue leading the curatorial team during this difficult personal period, and suggested that a temporary leave of absence might be in everyone's best interest. His signature on the email included his position as a major donor and arts patron, emphasizing the financial leverage he believed he held. What he hadn't anticipated was the board's loyalty to me, built over years of successful exhibitions and fundraising, and their immediate forwarding of his message to me with assurances of their complete support. He's trying to strip away everything that matters to you, Morgan had observed. Your reputation, your professional position, your financial security. Classic abuser tactics. If he can't control you, he'll try to destroy what you value. Now, as I fastened my grandmother's locket around my neck, I steeled myself for the first time I would face Blake in person since discovering his betrayal. The courtroom would provide a structured environment with security present, but the emotional challenge of confronting the man who had spent 12 years deceiving me remained daunting. "Ready?" Morgan asked, appearing at the guest cottage door precisely at 8:15 a.m. as planned. Her charcoal suit and crisp white blouse projected professional confidence, while the subtle Preston green silk scarf at her throat, my grandmother's favorite color, served as a small but meaningful symbol of her loyalty to my family. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, gathering my portfolio of documents. 2 security personnel escorted us to Morgan's car, their vigilance a reminder that Blake's increasingly erratic behavior had necessitated continued protection. The drive to the Suffolk County Probate and Family Court in downtown Boston was quiet, each of us mentally reviewing our strategy for the hearing. "Remember," Morgan said as we approached the courthouse, "Blake will likely attempt to engage you directly, to make eye contact, to project hurt or concern, to create some emotional response he can use. Don't give him that satisfaction. Focus on Judge Winters, on me, on your documents, anywhere but him." I nodded, grateful for her guidance. Despite everything I now knew about Blake's true nature, part of me still held the muscle memory of our connection. 12 years of emotional responses that couldn't simply be erased by intellectual understanding of his deception. The courthouse steps were mercifully free of press, though Morgan had warned this might change as the case progressed, particularly if the financial aspects became public knowledge. Blake's vehicle was already in the parking area, the sleek black Tesla he'd purchased last year, with what I now understood was likely my money. Inside, the courthouse's solemn atmosphere provided a strange comfort. Here, evidence mattered more than emotion, facts more than feelings. We were directed to courtroom 4C, where Judge Winters would be presiding over our hearing. Blake and Daniel Hargrove were already seated at the respondents' table when we entered. Blake wore his most conservative dark gray suit, his serious client meetings attire, and had gotten a fresh haircut. Every aspect of his appearance had been calculated to project stability and trustworthiness. As we moved to the plaintiff's table, I felt his eyes tracking me, seeking eye contact that I deliberately denied him. Instead, I focused on arranging my documents precisely, aligning each folder with methodical care. "All rise," the court officer announced as Judge Winters entered the courtroom. The proceedings began with formal introductions and confirmation of the case details. Judge Winters, familiar with our situation from the emergency hearing, moved efficiently through the preliminary matters before addressing the substantive issues. "Before we proceed to arguments, I want to clarify the court's position on several, Motions filed this week, she began, her tone businesslike. First, regarding the respondent's motion for psychological evaluation of the petitioner, denied. The evidence presented fails to establish any legitimate basis for questioning Mrs. Preston Hayes's mental capacity. I didn't look at Blake, but I could feel his tension from across the room. Second, regarding the petitioner's motion for continuation of the temporary protective order, granted and extended for 90 days, subject to review at that time. Another small victory. The protective order would prevent Blake from approaching me or entering any Preston property for the next 3 months. Third, regarding expedited financial discovery, granted. Both parties will provide complete financial disclosures within 14 days, including all accounts, assets, communications regarding financial planning, and any trust-related documents. Judge Winters looked up from her notes, her gaze moving between Blake and me. Now, counsel your opening. Positions, please, Ms. Sullivan. Morgan rose, her posture impeccable. Your Honor, this case centers on a calculated long-term financial scheme perpetrated by the respondent against my client. As outlined in our filing, Blake Hayes methodically positioned himself to access Mrs. Preston Hayes's family trust upon its activation, planning to file for divorce immediately thereafter to claim half the assets. She proceeded to present our evidence concisely. The timing of Blake's planned divorce filing to coincide exactly with my trust activation, his recorded communications with Daniel Hargrove discussing strategies to circumvent the prenuptial agreement, the financial tracking showing how he had systematically diverted funds from our joint accounts to his personal holdings over years. Most significantly, Your Honor, Morgan concluded, the respondent explicitly admitted his intentions in a phone conversation overheard by my client on the evening of her 40th birthday, stating that after 12 years of playing the devoted husband, he had earned every penny of this payoff, and detailing his strategy for claiming approximately $40 million from the Preston Family Trust. Throughout Morgan's presentation, I maintained my focus on Judge Winters, on my notes, on the court reporter, anywhere but Blake. Still, I was acutely aware of his presence, of the tension emanating from him as each piece of evidence further dismantled the facade he had maintained for so long. When Daniel Hargrove rose to present Blake's position, his approach was precisely what Morgan had predicted, a combination of character assassination and misdirection. Your Honor, my client categorically denies these outlandish allegations, which appear to be the product of either malicious external influence or unfortunate misunderstanding, Hargrove began, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of a man accustomed to persuading through sheer confidence. Blake Hayes has been a devoted husband for 12 years, supporting Mrs. Hayes's career, participating in her family obligations, and building a life together based on mutual respect and shared goals. The suggestion that this entire marriage was some elaborate scheme to access trust funds is not only offensive, but defies logical scrutiny. He continued by portraying Blake as the bewildered victim of a sudden, inexplicable change in my behavior, triggered, he implied, by certain family advisors who had long been suspicious of anyone outside the Preston inner circle. What we have here, Your Honor, is not a case of financial manipulation by Mr. Hayes, but rather the unfortunate result of external manipulation of Mrs. Hayes by individuals who see an opportunity to exert control over significant family assets by driving a wedge between husband and wife. I could feel Blake's eyes on me as Hargrove spoke, seeking some reaction, some emotional response he could leverage. I gave him nothing, maintaining my neutral expression and steady focus on my notes. When Hargrove concluded, Judge Winters asked, the question that cut to the heart of Blake's defense. Counsel, your characterization of the situation is noted, but you haven't specifically addressed the documented communications between your client and yourself regarding strategies to access the Preston Trust upon its activation. How do you explain those exchanges? Hargrove faltered slightly, his confident demeanor cracking. Your Honor, those communications, taken out of context, may appear concerning. However, they were simply discussions of standard financial planning for high-net-worth couples, ensuring that both parties' interests were protected as major assets came into the marriage. By filing for divorce immediately after the trust is activated? Judge Winters asked skeptically. That represent protection of both parties' interests? The timing discussions were theoretical, Your Honor. My client had no intention of filing for divorce. Judge Winters referred to her notes. Yet your firm had divorce papers prepared and ready to file on the morning following Mrs. Preston Hayes's 40th birthday, the exact date of trust activation. That suggests more than theoretical planning. Counselor. Hargrove's response was interrupted by a sudden commotion as Blake rose from his chair, his composure finally shattering. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Olivia, look at me." The court officer moved immediately toward Blake, but Judge Winters raised her hand, allowing the moment to unfold under her watchful eye. I finally turned to meet Blake's gaze directly, seeing the desperation and calculation warring in his expression. 12 years, he said, his tone modulating to the soft, intimate voice he had used in our most private moments. 12 years of building a life together. Can you really believe I never loved you? That everything was a lie? It was the question I had asked myself repeatedly since that moment at my birthday party, the one that had haunted my sleepless nights and quiet moments of doubt. Had it all been fake? Every kiss, every shared joy, every whispered plan for our future? I studied his face, the face I had woken up beside for 12 years, and saw for the first time the complete separation between his expert performance and his true self. The Blake I had loved had been a masterful creation, a character played with Oscar-worthy dedication. The real man standing before me was a stranger whose only genuine emotion was frustration at losing his carefully orchestrated payday. "Yes, Blake," I replied, my voice steady and clear in the hushed courtroom. "I believe you never loved me. Not because I want to believe it, but because the evidence makes it impossible to believe anything else." I gestured to the documents before me. The man who loved me wouldn't have documented strategies for divorcing me the moment my trust activated. He wouldn't have characterized our marriage as playing house for a payoff. He wouldn't have maintained separate accounts filled with money diverted from our joint finances for years. Blake's expression hardened as he realized his emotional appeal had failed. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "When this is over, you'll have nothing." Judge Winters had heard enough. "Mr. Hayes, sit down immediately, or you will be removed from this courtroom. Your outburst has been noted for the record and does nothing to support your counsel's characterization of your intentions." Blake sank back into his chair, the mask of the concerned husband completely gone now, replaced by cold fury. The remainder of the hearing proceeded with clinical efficiency. Judge Winters issued temporary orders maintaining the protective measures already in place, established a formal discovery schedule with severe penalties for noncompliance, and set a date for the next hearing after financial disclosures were complete. "Given the evidence presented regarding potential financial impropriety," she concluded, "I am also ordering forensic accounting of all accounts controlled by or accessible to Mr. Hayes during the marriage. Any assets removed from joint accounts or improperly diverted will be subject to full restitution with interest." As the hearing adjourned, Blake and Daniel Hargrove huddled in intense conversation, their body language conveying the seriousness of their situation. The initial legal skirmish had gone decisively in my favor, but I harbored no illusions that Blake would accept defeat gracefully. "Well done," Morgan said quietly as we gathered our materials. "You maintained perfect composure even during his emotional performance." "It wasn't difficult," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of the statement. "Once you see the manipulation for what it is, it loses its power." As we exited the courtroom, Blake attempted one final approach, stepping, into our path with Daniel's restraining hand on his arm. "Olivia, this isn't over," he said, his voice low but intense. "I still have options you haven't considered." Morgan stepped slightly forward, creating a physical barrier between us. "Mr. Hayes, you are currently in violation of a protective order. I suggest you step back immediately before I call the court officer." Blake's eyes never left mine. "Your grandmother would be disappointed to see how easily you're being manipulated by her attack dog." The invocation of my grandmother, the woman whose foresight had protected me from exactly this situation, ignited a cold anger within me. "My grandmother," I replied evenly, "predicted you would try exactly what you're doing now. Her preparations are why you're standing there making threats instead of celebrating your $40 million payday. She saw through you before I could, and made sure that when I finally did, I'd be protected." I touched the silver locket at my throat. "The difference between us, Blake, is that I had someone who genuinely loved me enough to protect me from you, while you had no one who loved you enough to protect you from yourself." The impact of my words was visible in his expression, a flash of genuine emotion breaking through his calculated facade. For the first time since I'd met him, I glimpsed the wounded core beneath all his manipulations, the emptiness that drove him to seek value in wealth rather than connection. Without another word, I walked past him, Morgan at my side. We exited the courthouse into the bright autumn sunlight, where Jacob Mercer waited beside a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. "All clear?" he asked Morgan as we approached. "Phase 1 complete," she confirmed. "Judge Winters ruled in our favor, on all counts. Now we prepare for his desperate countermoves." Jacob nodded, opening the vehicle door for us. "Security protocols remain in effect, then. We've already detected attempts to access the secondary Preston Trust accounts this morning. Sophisticated intrusion methods that suggest professional assistance. He's getting bolder," I observed as we settled into the SUV. "More desperate. And consequently more dangerous," Morgan agreed. "The next few weeks will require continued vigilance as the financial discovery proceeds." As we pulled away from the courthouse, I caught a glimpse of Blake watching from the steps, his expression unreadable at this distance. The man I had believed was my life partner, my most trusted ally, was now my most determined adversary, willing to employ any means to salvage something from his failed scheme. Yet despite the challenges still ahead, I felt an unfamiliar sense of liberation. The truth, however painful, had freed me from a far more insidious prison, the beautiful illusion of a loving marriage that had actually been a carefully constructed trap. "What comes next?" I asked, as we merged into Boston's midday traffic. "We follow the money," Morgan replied. "The forensic accountants will trace every transaction, every account, every financial move Blake has made during your marriage. If he's diverted funds, hidden assets, or conspired with others, we'll find the evidence. And if he attempts more aggressive measures, then we respond accordingly." Her expression was resolute. "Your grandmother prepared for this possibility, Olivia. The Preston women have faced adversaries like Blake Hayes before, men who believed their intelligence and charm entitled them to wealth they didn't earn. None of them prevailed against a prepared Preston." I touched my grandmother's locket, drawing strength from her legacy of foresight and determination. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since overhearing Blake's phone call at my birthday celebration, I felt genuinely confident in my path forward. 6 months later, I stood in the newly renovated office of the Bradbury Gallery, finalizing details for our most ambitious exhibition to date, a landmark showcase of women artists whose work had historically been overshadowed by their male contemporaries. The symbolism wasn't lost on my curatorial team, who had stood steadfastly behind me throughout the tumultuous divorce proceedings. The final settlement had been both vindicating and sobering. Blake's financial deception had proven even more extensive than initially suspected, with forensic accountants uncovering a network of hidden accounts and diverted assets totaling nearly $3 million over the course of our marriage. More significantly, The investigation had revealed broader improprieties in his investment practice, including questionable management of client funds that had triggered regulatory scrutiny and ultimately led to the collapse of Hayes Capital Advisors. The ambitious predator who had targeted me for my inheritance had lost everything in his attempt to claim it. Under normal circumstances, I might have felt some satisfaction in this outcome. Instead, I primarily felt relief. Relief that the chapter was closed, that the Preston Trust remained secure, and that the professional reputation I had built over years of dedicated work had survived Blake's attempts to undermine it. My phone buzzed with a message from Morgan. Final disposition complete. All documents signed and filed. You are officially and irrevocably divorced from Blake Hayes. Celebration dinner tonight? I smiled, typing a quick response. Absolutely. The Bradbury. Team is installing until late. Shall we say 8:30 at Rossetti's? My treat. Morgan had become more than my attorney during this ordeal. She had become a trusted friend and mentor, guiding me through the legal complexities while helping me process the emotional aftermath of such profound betrayal. Diana approached, with a catalog proof for the upcoming exhibition, her expression brightening when she saw my smile. Good news? The divorce is officially final, I confirmed. Every I dotted, every T crossed. Thank goodness, she replied with evident relief. Now you can truly move forward. She hesitated, then added, Have you heard the latest about Blake? I shook my head. After the initial legal victories, I had deliberately stopped following news about Blake, focusing instead on rebuilding my life and advancing my career. Apparently, he's left Boston completely. Someone said he's taken a position with a small firm in Arizona, quite a step down from running his own investment company here. The information settled over me without triggering any particular emotion, neither satisfaction nor regret. Blake Hayes had become a closed chapter in my life, a painful lesson in discernment, but no longer a presence that could affect my peace. I wish him clarity, I said finally, surprising myself with the sincerity of the sentiment. Maybe someday, he'll understand that what he sought through deception could have been his genuinely through honesty. Diana squeezed my arm gently. You're a better person than most would be in your position. Later that evening, as Morgan and I shared a celebratory dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant, she raised her glass in a toast. To Eleanor Preston, she said, whose wisdom continues to protect her family even years after her passing. I touched my grandmother's locket, which I had worn every day since discovering Blake's betrayal. And to new beginnings, I added, built on truth rather than illusion. As we clinked glasses, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months, from the shock of betrayal to the empowerment of action, from vulnerable target to architect of justice. The trust fund that Blake had coveted so desperately had indeed changed my life, but not in the way either of us had anticipated. It had given me not just financial security, but something far more valuable: the clarity to see through deception, the strength to stand against manipulation, and the wisdom to rebuild my life on a foundation of authenticity that no fortune hunter could ever undermine. My grandmother's inscription in the silver locket had proven prophetic: survival first. Justice second, thrive always. I had survived Blake's scheme. I had secured justice through the courts. And now, finally, I was ready to thrive on my own terms, wiser, stronger, and irrevocably free. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories, ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.